Hi, I'm Nigel Atherton from What Digital Camera, and I'm going to be taking you through the Nikon D60. Now you might think, to look at this camera, if you're familiar with the D40 or the D40X, the D60 looks remarkably similar, and you'd be right. Superficially, it's almost identical. There are very few external differences. Most of the changes are on the inside, and we'll look at those in a moment. The main thing you'll notice on the outside of the camera is the lens, which seems just that little bit chunkier than before, and that's because Nikon are now bundling this camera with an 18 to 55mm lens which has built-in vibration reduction. One of the weak points of the Nikon system is that its competitors often have built-in image stabilization on the sensor. With Nikon, of course, you use stabilization in the lenses, which means that there's an additional purchase. So by bundling a kit lens which has vibration reduction built into it, it means that that's one thing that they can cross off the list that its competitors have that they don't. And it only adds £30 to the price of the lens. You can actually buy the non-VR lens for £30 less, but really for £30 you'd be fool not to buy the VR version. So what have they added to the inside of this camera to differentiate it from the D40X? Well, there have been a few changes. The first of these is the addition of the X-Speed processor. This is the highly acclaimed processor used in the D3 and D300 cameras, and it's now made its way into this camera too. And this is an improved processor over its predecessor. It's better performance, and you're going to get better tonality and colour than the previous processor had. The sensor is the same as the D40X, is 10.2 megapixel CCD, but of course the processor will make a difference. And also the processor does allow the inclusion of some new features. The active D-lighting. There was standard D-lighting before. This is now an active D-lighting. D-lighting is kind of a shadow highlight control which enables you to preserve shadow and highlight detail in difficult lighting conditions at the press of the D-lighting button. There's now a button for this, by the way, on the top of the camera, so you can do that without having to go into the menu. And you can do that either before you take the picture or you can do it afterwards in post-processing. Speaking of post-processing, the D60 also has, for the first time on a Nikon entry-level DSLR, the ability to process your RAW files in camera, make adjustments to them, use the D-lighting if you want to, and then save that as a JPEG without affecting your original RAW image. Now, another of the features that many of Nikon's competitors had in their entry-level digital SLRs, which Nikon didn't, was some kind of sensor cleaning system. But not any longer, because the D60 has that solution as well. You can see that when you turn the camera on, and I'll do so now, you'll be able to see it. You'll see that you get a little message, sensor cleaning in progress. When you turn it off, it happens again. But that's not all the Nikon has. I mean, that's the standard system where the actual sensor itself vibrates to shake off any dust. That's pretty much the system that most other people use. But Nikon have also come up with something new, and you have to look on the inside to see this. It's called the airflow control system. And basically, it's a design, the way the inside is designed to channel dust away from the sensor and into a little box, and it uses the vacuum created when you take a picture and the mirror flips up. That vacuum is used to push the air away from the sensor into a little box where it's not going to cause any harm to anybody. I'll take the lens off here, and you can just get a glimpse of it. Down there you can see that little box with the little holes. That's part of the system. Now also, like the D40 and D40X, but unlike the other Nikon digital SLRs, the D60 doesn't have a top plate LCD for data display. Instead it uses the big LCD on the back, the colour LCD. I'll press it, switch it on, here you go, you can see it. And one of the nice things about this display is that as you turn the camera for the vertical position, it too turns, and whichever direction you put it in, it turns too. You can also customise this to your own needs. If I press the menu button, go into the info display format, you'll see that here we are in the program shutter and aperture priority modes. I've got it in classic mode, which is the mode you just saw. If I decide I don't really want orange, I want blue, so let's go to blue, select OK. OK, and there we go, it is in blue. That's a fairly trivial thing. A slightly more dramatic change is when you select the graphic mode. And in graphic mode, let's stick with orange. This gives you quite a different interface, which is very good if you're learning photography and don't quite understand what apertures do and things. It gives you a graphical view of the aperture and enables you to see, as you turn the aperture display, enables you to see the aperture closing and opening to remind you what's happening as you turn the dial. When you go to shutter speeds, It also has a different display there showing what's happening with the shutter speeds. You can also, in the menu, you can also set your own wallpaper if you'd rather do that. You can also put your own picture on there, which I won't do right now, but you can obviously, when you have a picture you're particularly proud of, you can put that on the background as well. Now, to make adjustments to some of these settings, obviously apart from shutter speed and aperture, to make the adjustments to these settings which come down the right hand side of the screen, you press this button here. And here, as you can see, here we're adjusting the compression, the image size, white balance, ISO, and to select one of these you just press OK, and then you get a little picture illustrating the sorts of subjects where you might use that ISO. And there, here we have a little nice pleasant boat scene, but you can see action. They've got a picture of a jet ski for 400, ISO 800 they've got a night shot, and they've got like an interior indoor concert shot for 1600. These just give people a visual clue as to why you might use these ISO settings, which is quite useful, I think, for the beginner particularly. The release mode, single or continuous, depending on what mode you're in. Some of these may be greyed out so you can't use them all. Metering pattern, active D-lighting on or off. You've got flash exposure compensation and basic exposure compensation, all by using the control pad, the four-way control pad. And then again in the middle there you've got the display of shutter speed and aperture. Now, the Nikon D60 does not have a built-in AF motor. It uses motors in AFS lenses. This means that really it's only compatible with Nikon's AFS lenses. These are the ones that have the built-in motor. You can of course use other Nikon lenses with this camera, but you'd have to focus them manually. So this is something to bear in mind if you're switching from, say, 35mm, where you may have a collection of Nikon lenses already. Now, focusing itself is performed by 3 focusing points in the camera, which is pretty low specification these days. Most of the competitors have 9 or 11 focusing points, which means that there's a greater chance of the camera actually picking out the subject and getting it in focus. The focusing also is not the fastest in the world on the D60, and it's probably one of the weaker areas of this camera. In other respects, the D60 performs very well. Exposures are very good, well exposed. Obviously, if you're in very bright contrasty light, you've got the benefit of the active D-lighting, which helps to maintain shadow and highlight detail. Colour is very good as well, punchy and accurate. Neutral whites, the white balance seems to do a very good job. Also, there are lots of post-production tools and custom colour functions on the camera, so you can personalise the image, colours and settings to your own tastes. Noise is very well controlled too. The X-Speed processor really does prove its worth in this camera. Even up to ISO 800, its noise is pretty well controlled, and even at ISO 3200 there is some noise, but it's not as bad as it would have been in something like the D40 or D40X. You can shoot both RAW and JPEG simultaneously, but disappointingly you can only shoot basic JPEG if you're shooting RAW, the lowest quality JPEG, not high quality JPEG, which would have been useful. On the back of the camera you can see that it has a 2.5-inch LCD, which is getting a bit small these days really. Most of Nikon's competitors are looking at 2.7 or even 3-inch LCD screens. You'll notice above it there's also a proximity sensor there, which like Sony uses, which detects your eye. When you put the camera up to your eye, it knows that you're looking through the viewfinder, and it turns off the LCD. Incidentally, there's no live view on this camera, so the LCD is purely for reviewing pictures afterwards and changing the menus and settings. As you can see, the camera uses the SD card format, like most entry-level DSLRs these days, and like Nikon's D40 and D40X. So what do we think of the Nikon D60 overall? Well, it's a bit of a mixed bag. It has most of the features that you'll need: a 10 megapixel sensor, which is enough, the X-Speed processor from the D300 and D3, which is a very good processor. It has now it has vibration reduction. If you choose the lens, it has the vibration reduction built into it, and for 30 quid you'd be a fool not to. It now has dust reduction, 2 kinds of dust reduction in here for the first time in the Nikon entry-level digital SLR. But on the minus side, 3 focusing points is not very many compared to some of its competitors, and the focusing is a bit of a letdown on this camera compared to some of its rivals. And the LCD screen, 2.5-inch, is a little bit on the small side. JPEG and RAW, the fact that you can't shoot RAW with a high quality JPEG, these are small things, but the most important thing is the image quality, and here I'm pleased to say pictures are very, very good. As with most Nikon cameras, they're sharp, there's good colour, there's good tonality, there's good noise control, and at the end of the day, its picture quality is the most important thing, which is why we're happy to recommend the Nikon D60 and give it a score of 85%.